First Peter. So, unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end. So we've taught a long time here on the adversary, and I can't keep teaching the same things over and over. But I just wanted to go back and let you know and remind you of what we've heard over the last few weeks. We started off this series on the adversary's origin. Remember that? How we showed he was Lucifer from the beginning, an archangel, and how all that came to pass. And then we moved to the objectives of the adversary: steal, kill, and what? Destroy. Then we moved to without cause. I mean, remember that teaching. That came out dynamically. I think we had over 300 views on Facebook alone, just on that teaching. People were super duper blessed with the teaching on without cause. And then last week we hit our authority over who? The adversary. We showed how we have greater authority than the adversary does. And we looked at the magnificence of Ephesians chapter 1, verses 19 through 23. And so today, to close out this series, I want to hit the subject matter: resist the devil. That's what we want to look at. And then next Sunday will be December 30th, and we're going to do what I will call a transitional teaching between 2018 and 2019. So it'll be a fun time. But today we want to hit resist the devil. And so for those of you who are taking notes, at the top of your page, I want you to write these three words: submit, resist, flee. It's going to be a test. That's why I'm giving you the answers now. Submit, resist, and flee. So, you recognize that we are in a great spiritual conflict and competition. And victory cannot be won by way of our five senses. Now, you've heard me say this also, and I'm going to say it again because it's still the truth today, and it'll be the truth 100 years from now if the Lord tarries. If you want salvation, you must deal with Jesus Christ. Okay? But if you want to live and enjoy your salvation, you must defeat the adversary. Okay? To get this salvation, it's Jesus Christ. For he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. But for us, once we get that salvation, to live it and enjoy it, we have to defeat the adversary. So are you in 1 Peter? Let's look at chapter 5. We're looking at resisting the devil. 1 Peter chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 6. And it says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of who? God. Here's the purpose why you humble yourself under God's mighty hand, that he may exalt you when? In due time. Well, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. In the spiritual competition, you will need for God, your Father, at points and times to exalt you. In order for you to defeat this adversary, this devil, you will have to be exalted. But the great key to being exalted is the first two words of verse 6. Humble yourselves. You see that? In order for God to exalt us in this spiritual competition, we have to humble ourselves. Verse 7 says, casting some of your care upon him, for he what? Care for you. Does it say some? It says all. God wants us to cast all of our care without exception unto him. And what the adversary would like for us to believe is, oh, that's too small for God. God ain't got time to be hearing me pray about this. God ain't interested in hearing about this stuff. That's a lie. God cares for every single fiber of your being. You are his son and daughter. He gave his only begotten son for you. That's why he cares and loves you so much, and he wants you to be involved with him and him involved with you. I loved this great line. Some of you who are part of that class that Reverend McNally did. He said, make eggs with God. Get up in the morning and make your eggs with God. In other words, get God involved in every aspect of your life. Invite God into every aspect of your life. Why? Because he cares for you. You see how that is all put together? Now look at verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the who? Devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may what? Devour. Notice it doesn't say because Don Smith's adversary. It says your adversary, which means he's personal. I got news for you, so let's just get over this. He knows you. You understand? The adversary knows you. He knows your strengths. He knows your weaknesses. He knows even where I might be faking it. He knows, because he's been here how long? Thousands and thousands of years. I told somebody the other day, the devil is the original GPS system. He's been watching and observing all of us. And he knows. He's your personal what? Adversary. He knows you. But notice here in verses 7, 8, great things come in three. There's three things. There's casting, there's sober, and what? Vigilant. And they all work together. If you remove one, the whole structure falls apart. Watch this. If you don't cast all your cares to God, then you can't be sober. And if you can't be sober, then you can't be vigilant. See how God put it all right there. Casting all your care upon him, for he cared for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. We got to cast. And this word casting here in verse 7 means to hurl with sudden motion. It is a mindset to lay aside burdens. You hear that? And it doesn't matter how big or how small the burden is. God says, cast it to me. Once I can cast, now I can be sober. Then I can be vigilant. Then I will have the strength, the authority, and the ability to resist the devil. Does that make sense? Look at James chapter 4. James chapter 4, cornerstone of our teaching this morning. James chapter 4. You all there? Okay, James chapter 4, and we're going to start here in verse 4. God uses some very bold words. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, so adulteress. You see that? Guess what that's referring to? That's referring to the concept of idolatry. That's what God calls, because in another section, Paul says, I've married you to one. Talking about God and his son, Jesus Christ. So if we start worshiping other things, then guess what? From a spiritual standpoint, you're an adulterer. That's what God is talking about here. Notice what he says. Know ye not that friendship of the world is what? Enmity with God. Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of who? I didn't write that. Don't get mad at me. God wrote it. God had it inspired and wrote. So guess what? Got news for you. Flirting with friendship of the world will keep you from being able to resist the devil. And you have to decide this morning, am I flirting with friendship of the world? You know, or maybe you don't know. After this teaching, maybe you'll find out closer. Are you flirting with the world? Are you making ties and connections and allegiances to the world rather than being the friend of God? Because it says at the end of that verse, whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. God's real clear. You don't even need the Greek language to understand that one. God's really clear. Now watch how he builds this. Do ye think, verse 5, that the scripture saith in vain, the spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy. But in contrast to that, verse 6, he, God, giveth more what? Grace. Isn't that fantastic? God's got more divine, unmerited favor to give to you. It says, but he give, verse 6, but he giveth more grace. Watch this. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but he giveth grace unto who? The humble. Now you're going to see here in a second who we're supposed to resist, but God sets the example first by telling you who he resists. And who does God resist? The proud. Who's more prouder than the adversary? See, but it also is not just talking about the adversary, it's talking about you and I as well. Because listen to this definition of proud. It means to show oneself above another, despise others and treat them with contempt. That's what it means to be proud. I'm going to read it again. To show oneself above another, to despise others and treat with contempt. That's what it means to be proud. So how do we stay out of this proud category? Very simple. Jesus Christ said a man should love the Lord his God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he should love his neighbor as his what? Self. If you do those two things, you'll stay out of this proud category. In fact, when he got done saying it, he said, all the law and the prophets hang on these two laws. So guess what? If I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and I love my neighbor as myself, then I'm not violating anything that Moses wrote. I'm not violating anything that David wrote. I'm not violating anything in the Word of God, because he says all the prophets and the law hang on these two, the prophet and commandments. Do you see that? So that's how we can stay out of this proud thing. Now watch this. See, at work they call me a wordsmith. I don't know what that means, because the way I use words and how when someone says something to me in seconds, I can split it apart. Right? Now watch this. Here's a phrase, and I don't care. It's just the truth of the word. We can wear the hat, whatever. Make America great again. Right? Those are words. But what does that have to do with what Jesus Christ said? Jesus Christ said, if any man would be great, let him be servant of who? All. See, one who wants to be great has an outward mindset, not an inward mindset. One who wants to be great, let me make it really plain. To be great in God's eyes is service. That's what it means to be great in God's eyes. So I'm okay with make America great again, then that means America must become the country of service. Plain and simple as that. Otherwise, it's just words. You get what I'm saying? If we're not serving, that's what it means to be great. When Jesus Christ had those 12 men around him, they were asking him, who's going to be great? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? They had all these questions, right? And he said, if you want to be great, then be servant of all. And the word servant in that text is doulos. Okay? I'm going to get into that in a few weeks, this whole doulos concept. Because we in the Western world have romanticized it. And we got to go back to the Semitic and to the Eastern custom of what it really meant to be a doulos. Okay? Why do you think Jesus Christ washed those men's feet? That was his last service example to them before he got arrested and was crucified. He washed their feet. Remember Peter? Oh, no, Lord, you're not washing my feet, because he knew it was the lowest of the low. And Jesus Christ was his Lord and Savior. And Jesus says, well, if I don't wash your feet, then you ain't got no part of me. Okay, Jesus, get my head under my arms, get my back, wash everything. Peter finally got confronted and woke up. You see that? That's what it means to be about service. So God's definition of service or greatness is service. Let's keep that in our minds. Now, this is what I was building towards. Here's your 3 words found in one verse. James 4, verse 7. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will what? Flee from you. So let's take some look at these words. 3 words: submit, resist, and flee. Okay? The word submit is our great Greek word, hupotasso. Have you heard of that before? It's made up of the Greek preposition hupo, which means under, and then the Greek word tasso. Tasso means to appoint, to order, to arrange, and I love this one, to fix oneself. Let me say that again. To appoint, to order, to arrange, to fix oneself. Under. That's what you do. You fix yourself under. And I did a little bit more work around this. Literally, hupotasso has two really root meanings. Number one, it is a military term. So there's a military term, and then we have a non-military term. The military term or definition is to arrange oneself under the command of a leader. That's what hupotasso means. How many remember hearing this from a great man? When God says jump, we don't ask how high, we just jump. That's what Dr. Werwell used to say all the time. Why? Because you have fixed yourself by your free will choice. You have submitted. You have put yourself under the ultimate leader who is God. That's what it means to submit. You get that? See, and then the non-military definition, we've heard this one before too. Loving obedience by proper arrangement and deliberate decision. That's the non-military definition. Either one fits, right? Because you got to submit yourself. Now here's the question. God is spirit, correct? God is not a man, the word says, that he should lie. God is spirit. So how do you submit to spirit? Very simple. We submit to God by submitting to his word, to his commands, especially those written to us, the 7 church epistles. Because in John 1:1, the one that the Trinitarians like to use and got it all messed up, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God's Word is as much God as God is God. You understand? Why? Because God has integrity. God has wedded himself to his word. You may deny him, but he can't deny himself. See how that works? So as I'm submitting to his word, I'm submitting to him. That's how you submit to God who is spirit, especially the 7 church epistles, Romans through what? Thessalonians. That's what we submit to. Submit. God is not going to take a book and pow, hit you over the head and say, submit. Right? Heel of his boot. Boom! Submit! God's not going to do that. Who has to do the submitting? We do, because notice what it says. Submit who? Yourselves. I don't have time to submit you. I'm too busy trying to submit myself. You see how that all works? So just as God don't have a boot, God ain't got no boot either. Right? We just keep bringing the word back to each other's mind to remind each other of what the word says. Submit yourselves, therefore, to who? God. Who? God. Who? God. God. I just want to make sure you see that. This says God. Okay? Next words are resist who? The devil. This word resist is anthistemi, is how it's pronounced. Now listen to this. This means to set against, to withstand, and to oppose. That's what it means to resist. To set against, to withstand, and to oppose. So if I am resisting the devil, that means I am setting myself against that bird. I'm setting myself against him. I'm withstanding him. I am opposing him wherever he arises. That's what it means to resist. Ever seen people fight? First thing they do, what do? They put them up, don't they? Right? If you met somebody and the first thing they did was like this, you wouldn't be like, oh, they want to have a conversation with me. You know, they're opposing, right? That's what we're supposed to do. And here's the great thing about this Greek word. In this resisting, time is not a consideration. Oh, that's good. Write that one down. In resisting, time is not a consideration. Because God doesn't say, oh, resist for 3 minutes. Resist for 3 days. The rest of the verse will tell you what the time is. How long do you resist? Till he flee. And sometimes he's not going to flee in the first 5 minutes. Ask Jesus Christ. Right? Oh, here's one for you in terms of time consideration. He's not going to flee immediately. Ask Job. Took Job months before he finally ran the adversary off and could get healed. So there's no time consideration. The other thing about this word resist in the Greek is in the active voice, which means you're the subject who does the acting. You are the one to be resisting. And then it's also in the imperative mood. The imperative mood means it's a command. God commands you and me to resist the devil. It's a command, just like love is a command. See? A lot of us like the love part, but we may not be liking this resisting part. Resist the devil. It's a command. And here it is. We got to resist him in whatever form he shows up in. And he can show up in any form in which he has knowledge of or access to. You understand? He can show up in religion. He can show up in politics. He can show up in various cultures throughout the world. But when I recognize him, what does the word command me to do? Resist him. That's what the word says. That's why now lately I'm almost apolitical. Because you got to resist the adversary no matter what quote unquote party he comes from. Right? Why in the world in our country is you're a tad bit better of a damn liar if you're on the right than you are if you're on the left? Pardon me. See? That's where we get caught up in this, oh, it's on the right, so guy lying, it can't be too bad. Oh, but if he lies and he's from the left, he's horrible. Right? I got news for you. A liar is a liar. Is that not correct? Jesus Christ declared about the devil, and he told the men born of the seed of the serpent, your father was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Is that not what Jesus Christ said? So if someone is lying, where is that coming from? It's the adversary. And the word tells me to resist that, to stand against, right? If I stood up here and lied, I would hope somebody in the audience would say, excuse me, Don, that's a lie, right? Not go along with it. Because guess what? If I hear that from one of you, guess what I'm going to say? Excuse me, that's not the truth of the word. Okay? Hope I'm not being too much for you this morning. But it's still the truth of the word. That's what we're supposed to do. Does that make sense? Now watch this. You can't see the form in which the adversary arises until you first submit. By submitting to God, God's going to show you the various forms and aspects and ways that the adversary shows up. In one verse in Isaiah, God says he wants to give us the treasures of darkness. Have you not read that? Yeah. See? But until I submit to God, I won't see it. It's like when I was going to school, we had to write research papers. And they say you write your research paper by gathering as much information you can and you let the information speak. You don't go into the research already with a preconceived idea. Because guess what will happen? It'll color your research, right? If I start going into something, I'm going to examine colors, and my favorite color is blue. Guess what I'm going to see? Blue! When God may want me to see orange, red, yellow, or the other various colors, right? So if I go into this word with a preconceived idea, that is, the adversary is going to blind me. And I'm not going to see things. So we go to the word and we let the word what? Speak. We let it speak to our hearts and minds. And when we submit to God, God will show you this bird called the adversary. He'll show you in his various shapes, forms, fashions. Then you got to make the choice to resist. Doesn't make any sense if you see it and you don't resist, right? If I put you out here on a street corner and you got to walk across the street, you can see this car coming, but what's going to happen if you keep walking? So you're going to get hit, right? So I can see the adversary, and then by my free will choice, either because I don't have the courage or the renewed mind process, not resisting. That's not what God wants. Does that make sense? Let me show you a couple examples of this word resist. Look at Luke 21. Luke 21. Look what Jesus Christ tells his people he's going to provide to them. Luke 21, verse 15. For I will give you a mouth and what? Wisdom. So obviously that's a figure of speech. He's telling them, I will give you a mouth of wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor what? Resist. There's your Greek word, anthistemi. See? God can give you wisdom, so much wisdom that none of your adversaries can resist it. You see this verse right there? It's one of the reasons why some of us have problems with outreach. Because we're not relying on the wisdom of God. We're trying to come up with our own strategies on how to witness to someone. God told me right there by way of his son, Jesus Christ, he will give me a mouth of wisdom that if the adversaries can't resist it, what about Joe, who's just looking for God? He won't be able to resist. You see how that works? And if we would just rely on God to give us the words to speak, instead of coming up with gadgets, like our name is Inspector Gadget or something. Like we're coming up with gadgets. All you got to do is go tell your story. Go tell what God has done for you. Grab someone's attention and show them the word, right? Tell them I belong to a dynamic fellowship. People here love one another. It's not hypocritical like you may have seen in other places. And give them a chance to come. Does that make sense? But there's your word, antihistamine, right there in verse 15. Excuse me. I said that wrong, but you got my gist. Look at Romans. Look at Romans 13. Romans 13, you may be familiar with this. So let me say for the record, including people who are watching, Romans 13 has nothing to do with civil governments. 95% of Christianity uses this to say this has to do with government. Has nothing whatsoever to do with government. Paul is talking to the church. Now watch how this develops. Romans 13, verse 1. Let every soul, I wrote a note in my Bible and put next to soul, I put believer. Let every soul, let every believer be subject unto the higher powers. Oh, see, that's government. No, it's not. It's the higher powers of the one body. It's the higher powers of the church. All you got to do is give it a thought. So then does that mean everybody should have submitted to Hitler or Mussolini or some other beast kind of guy because God said so? See? Think. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of who? God. The powers that be are ordained of who? God. That's what the word says. I didn't write it. But even in the powers, the meaning like energized ministers, what's the power? It's ultimately God. That's what he's trying to get you to see, not necessarily the minister. Be careful around that. We didn't got deceived around that. Oh, that's the apostle. I can't argue with the apostle. Right? That's the prophet. I can't argue with the prophet. Well, guess what? God talks about false prophets. People get off from time to time, don't they? Including me. People get off from time to time. But ultimately, the powers of God. Let me keep moving. Verse 2. Whosoever, therefore, what's the word? There's your Greek word. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves what? Damnation. Another word for damnation is consequences. All right? Used to love that saying. Doctor used to say people will bust their head against the word. That's who they're opposing. They're opposing God and his word. So they keep trying to get away with the standard. That don't work. I don't want that. They'll bust their head, he said, trying to oppose God. That's what it means there. You're going to receive consequences. Does that make sense? Yes. Here's another one. You'll like this one. Look at Mark around this word resist. Look at Mark. Good thing we don't have a person named Mark in the fellowship. Look at Mark chapter 14. Jesus is in the garden. He's praying. He's with the disciples. And old Judas comes up with the military guys. Watch this record. Mark 14. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. I shouldn't have went to Mark. Sorry. See, I just told you I make mistakes. I got ahead of myself. Write this record down. Galatians 2:11. That's where the word says, and Paul withstood Peter to the face. That withstood is this word for resist. Wouldn't you have liked to be a part of that conversation? You think Paul went to Peter and said, now, Peter, come on, guy. No, you know better than that, than the context. He withstood him. That means there was probably some power, authority, and fire in Paul's words when he withstood Peter, because he said Peter was to be what? Blamed. See? You can't fall apart at reproof, because we all get it. Right? If Randall reproves me, doesn't mean he hates me. If Xavier reproves me, doesn't mean he dislikes me. It means in my heart of hearts, they love me and they see me off the word and they want me back on so I can get the results. That should be our mindset around reproof. And I guarantee you it was Peter's mindset, because I got nowhere in the text to see that Peter fell apart. He responded. Right? Look at Ephesians 6. We'll come back to Mark. Look at Ephesians 6. We are to resist the devil. Ephesians chapter 6, look at verse 13. Says, wherefore take unto you. See, I love that. You see, I got this pen right here, right? When God says take, it's God handing you the pen. He wants you to take it from him. You see that? So you can utilize it. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, or all the resources of God, that ye may be able to what? Withstand. There's our Greek word. That you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, stand. See? It's all over the word if we just take a look at it. That's the intensity and passion in which we're supposed to resist. Now listen to this. Make sure you write this down. Only by submission to God can we gain the spiritual capability and strength to resist the devil. See, when I told you the order of the words are perfect, we submit first, and then through submission, we gain the spiritual capability and strength to do the next part of the verse, which is what? Resist the devil. Once we've resisted the devil, look what we get to do last but not least. Go back to where we were in James 4. Submit. What's the next word? Resist. And what's the last word? Flee. Go back to James 4 so you can see it again. James 4 verse 7. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he might flee. He will flee from you. That's a promise and a half. If I submit, if I resist, God promises the devil, the diablos will flee. Now let's look at this word flee and we'll close it out. This word flee in the Greek means to seek safety by flight. It means to escape. It means to vanish. If I submit, if I resist, the adversary will vanish. He will run. He will get out of your presence. Does that make sense? Okay. Now I love this because Reverend Ford taught me this one. He said that this word flee does not mean to coexist or to try to manage. Don't try to coexist with the devil and don't try to manage him. He's not a pet. You understand? This flee is not trying, and that's what we do sometimes. We try to coexist with darkness. We try to manage darkness. I got this dark thought in my head. If I keep it down just enough, it won't come back up. Doesn't say for me to manage it. Doesn't tell me to coexist with it. It tells me, this word says, he will flee. And watch how God works this. You want to see the first occurrence? I got some time constraints, so I'm going to give you the first occurrence. It's in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. The first occurrence of the word flee for the New Testament. And guess what context is it in? It's Jesus Christ just being born. The angel comes to Joseph and tells Joseph to take his wife and his child and to flee into Egypt. It's the first occurrence. Now, I got questions for you. When God, by way of that angel, showed up to Joseph and told Joseph to flee, you think it took Joseph 3 weeks to pack up? No, Joseph got in the wind, as they would say. Right? If we left anything, Mary, too bad. God, by the angel, said we are to flee. Right? He probably had a stick whacking the donkey. Let's go! Because God said to flee. That's the first occurrence of that. The record I wanted to show you, you got to see this one. Go back to Mark 14. I'm not making a mistake this time. Mark 14. This is all in the context of fleeing, what the devil will do. Mark 14. And this is in the garden. Judas shows up with the army, the military guys. And watch what this says here in verse 48. And Jesus answered and said unto them, I'm in Mark chapter 14, verse 48. And Jesus answered and said unto them, are ye come out as against a thief, with swords and with staves to take me? Verse 49. I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and ye took me not. But the scriptures must be what? Fulfilled. Verse 50. And they all forsook him and fled. Who's the ones fleeing? The disciples. They fled from Jesus Christ. Quick, fast, and a hurry. Right? But old Peter, I'll never deny you. Never, Lord. But he might have been the first one leading the group out the garden, running, getting away. That's the emphasis of this word, flee. See, the adversary will flee you like that, right? Ever seen a dog that gets hit or hurt and he squeals and runs off? The adversary will do the same thing. But it takes you submitting first and then you what? Resisting. 1 Corinthians 10:14 tells us to flee idolatry. Flee it. Don't try to coexist with idolatry. Don't try to manage idolatry. Flee from it. And we'll close here in 2 Timothy, a verse near and dear to my heart, because it gives what a man, woman, child who has a ministry, what they're supposed to do. Look what Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 2. And verse 22 says, what's the first word? Flee. Flee also youthful lusts. Well, what is that? See? He tells Timothy to flee youthful lusts. And youthful lusts are the lusts and cravings you know that you should have outgrown. But they're still hanging around in your head and heart. He tells Timothy to flee those things. See? Why do we need as a minister? Why does a minister need to flee youthful lust? Because youthful lust will confine and constrict your ministry. That's why you got to flee it. Now, I love verse 22 because not only does he tell him what to flee, but he tells him what to pursue. Flee also youthful lust. But, in contrast, follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. You see that? Flee the youthful lust and pursue this, Timothy. And this word follow here in verse 22 means follow till you overtake. Pursue after these things until you overtake them. Here's a better way of putting it. You pursue after these things, Timothy, until these things become one with you and you're one with them. Okay, so sometime this week you'll catch that. That just went right over your heads. I could see it. What is a minister supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? I'm to follow after righteousness until I become one with righteousness. I'm to follow after faith or believing until I become one with it. I'm to follow and pursue after and overtake the love of God in the renewed mind and manifestation. And I am to pursue after peace until I overtake it. That's a lifetime of work. You get what I'm saying? But the first thing I got to do is flee all the youthful lusts. Outgrow those things that shouldn't still be hanging around in my life. And guess what? We all have them. Right? So some of you probably sitting here thinking some you got right now, right? We all have them. But look at how God tells him, flee from this, go this direction. I love that. Flee from this, Don, go to this direction. Follow and pursue after these things. And how big is God's righteousness? See why he says, I said it's going to take a lifetime? How big is believing? So big we still haven't mastered it. Right? How big is love? See? How big is peace? Big enough that people compromise. Some people even, unfortunately, give their lives trying to find peace. That's how big it is. This is what we're supposed to do. So, at the end of the day, in order to resist the devil, what must we do? Number one, we must submit to who? God. And we submit to God, whose spirit, by submitting to what? His word. Particularly the word found in Romans through Thessalonians, written directly to us. Does that make sense? Second thing we got to do this. Put them up. We got to resist. Right? We got to resist who? The devil. Notice it doesn't say resist each other. It says resist the devil. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. The devil could be in somebody. But we still got to make that demarcation. I'm resisting the devil and not the human being. Do you see that? And then once I have submitted, once I have resisted, now the adversary will go, wee, wee, wee. He will flee. Right? And in that resisting, what did I say? There is no time consideration. You may have to resist for a year. You may have to resist for 2 minutes. Doesn't matter. God says, commands you to resist. So that's how I wanted to close out this series on the adversary. I think I've given you a lot to work on. And let's get ready for 2019, because it's going to be the year of deliverance. And you're going to see that in a few days, weeks, and months. God bless. Love you.